With no return of heavy elements to the universe at large, there would be no biology. Now we have an immediate problem, and as a non-biologist, it's easy for me to point to it very strongly. Biologists know what they study, but if we're talking about life in the universe, we're worrying about the general case of something where we know one instance, and that's a difficult position to be in. And defining life is just difficult. For the professional biologist, it's difficult. For astrobiologists, perhaps even more so. Because if you ask that life have organizing principles and complex and interesting behavior, you might imagine you know what biology would look like, sight unseen in another world, but it's not obvious what it would look like. So if we saw that happening on the surface of an alien planet, we'd probably get quite excited. But there's no biology there. There's not even chemistry. That's just physics. That's just flour, water, a pie tray, and a bass speaker. So we're trying to broaden the envelope of biology. We don't yet know whether at the micro level of the genetic code or at the macro level of natural selection, biology operates anywhere other than the Earth. We suppose and hope that it might, because it'll add to our understanding when we discover something interesting. But the truth is, we have to be open for other possibilities. And we have to play this interesting game of asking about hypotheticals, because those hypotheticals might exist in the universe. We have to ask what might be, and doesn't violate any law of physics or chemistry or even our knowledge of biology, but isn't. Things that could happen but don't here, but might happen elsewhere. That's a difficult thing to do. When we're starting with talking about life in the universe, we have to be very clear about what life on Earth is and isn't. Probably to non-biologists, the most striking thing is that everything from a fungus to a great whale to a butterfly is all one thing. Life on Earth is one thing. And that one thing has the same genetic code, the same biochemical basis. And its basis, of course, is DNA. The tree of life used to be defined in terms of species, the diversity of species, dating, of course, back before Darwin. But the modern tree of life is based on the genetic materials, based on the gradual divergence from a hypothetical last common ancestor, perhaps 4 billion years ago on the Earth, where time moves forward in the upward direction, and where genetic diversity is represented by distance along this tree. This is very different from a tree of life based on species, because humans, if we could put humans on this, we are smaller than the eye, the dot on the eye of the animals. So we are the tiniest little twiglet on the tree of life. And most of the real estate of biological and genetic diversity and metabolic diversity is in microorganisms. This is a microbial world, and we are little outriggers, maybe small, unlikely contingent outcomes of evolution. We don't know. But that's the way the world looks. And so that's the context for understanding life in the universe. This is quite surprising at some level. We share this percentage, or these are the number of deviant nucleic acids, so the amount of genetic material overlap. And you may drink your beer and think that it's just a nice beverage and something that you relax with, but it actually has kinship with you at almost the 50% level. So you are not that different from your beer. And so it's striking that such a small amount of difference in genetic material It's no good playing the Guinness Book of Records game. If you want to make us best because we have more base pairs or more genes, it's not true. So you have to look somewhere else for why we're special. So this becomes a context for life in the universe too, if what happened on the Earth was not unusual. Now, the very difficult question of can we tell the story of how life on Earth started, that's, of course, would be a whole lecture. It's not clear. We cannot connect all the dots between the simple small molecules that were abundantly available in interstellar space and on the primordial Earth to the first cell or protocell. We cannot. But in different lab experiments, pieces of this story have been told, even to the level of self-catalyzing fragments of RNA, to the spontaneous formation of vesicles that have some of the properties of very small cells, and to the creation of small concentrated chemical reactors, which is at some level what a cell is before it gets going. But none of these produce replicating molecules that would hold a genetic code. None of these produce anything recognizable as a modern cell. So this is a story. This is historical science, and we may never be able to tell fully the story of how life on Earth started uniquely, and we may have to just face that. Life on Earth is telling us something else about what to expect in the universe, and that's by looking at the boundaries of life on Earth. So we kind of are proud of ourselves because we can live most places. We live in Alaska, we live in the desert here, and so on. But basically, we're ridiculously frail wusses. We're just pathetic. Life on Earth is much more hardy than we are, and that hardiness is all in microbial hands. So there are small microorganisms that live, you may say life needs water, but life lives in places where it hasn't rained for 100 years, the high Atacama Desert. We imagine that life needs water, but life can actually invent its own kind of antifreeze and so exist quite happily below the freezing point of water. Life can exist above the boiling point of water too. And entire ecosystems were found near hydrothermal vents in the 1970s in total darkness at pressures of hundreds of atmospheres, superheated water, and at some level independent of sunlight. So saying that life needs a star is clearly wrong because all it needs is an energy source, in this case geothermal energy. Life can handle incredible radiation doses. This is Deinococcus radiodurans, which could happily absorb 1,000 times the radiation dose that would drop us dead, stone dead, in about 5 seconds. And it does so by keeping stacked copies of its DNA to repair its DNA at a rate hundreds or thousands of times faster than we can. So these are all adaptations of life, which has permeated almost every conceivable ecological niche on the Earth, and maybe some that are inconceivable. Life has been found, rich, diverse microbial cultures have been found in mines that were closed by the EPA. They have toxic runoff, cadmium, mercury, silver, very, very toxic heavy elements to us. But microbes can metabolize these, they can gain their energy from them, and they exist quite happily. Also with other extreme conditions of high salinity or acidity, superheated water, and so on. And then surprises continue. A few years ago, a small microbe was found deep in a mine in South Africa that appears to be an ecosystem of one living in the bathed radiation glow of a totally dark mine shaft. And there are some estimates that say that 90% of the biomass of this planet is indeed below the Earth's surface in microbial forms, perhaps like this. So that's a context for life in the universe, and not all of these are tiny and may be a little uninteresting to us, microbes. Here's an extremophile, as they're called, which is visible. It's pretty small. It's about the size of the head of a pin or a little smaller. It's a tardigrade, known to children as water bear, and there are 700 different species of it. It has its own phylum, and it's quite a complex organism. It has this amazing trick of cryptobiosis, going into a freeze-dried state and rolling into a little ball where it can be carried on the wind or an animal fur. And the chemistry, the biochemistry of this process is being studied in labs as a way of learning perhaps how we might get suspended animation as something that we can do to ourselves. So pulling some of these things together, what is the expectation in advance of finding life anywhere else? Remember, it hasn't been found, that life will be common. We'd have to have some reason for that level of confidence without any evidence whatsoever. And the reasons are here. First, that life appeared very early in the history of the Earth, when the Earth was really a very inhospitable place, with impact rates thousands of times what they are now, intense volcanism, an unbreathable atmosphere. Life began. The motor of life ticked over very, very early indeed. We know that the basic ingredients can combine to form the next level of ingredients, even if we can't tell all that story. And then the extremophiles tell us that given the physical boundaries, the physical conditions that bound life on Earth, it is expanded to fill almost all of those conditions. It doesn't just go for the happy middle or the comfortable place, not like us. We want a nice beach house, in Hawaii, and then we're happy. We don't want to go to those hard places. Well, life goes to the hard places and does fine. We know the ingredients are everywhere, and as I'll talk about, there are abundant sites where life might form. So everything's there. It's like the table is set in the universe for life, and now we want to know if anyone's at the dinner. Let's start in the solar system, the nearest place we can look in some level of detail. And of course, we start with the place we've looked most closely, Mars.
The Milky Way, or even Mars, and the spiders from Mars. Out comes a man from Mars. Into the timelines with Mars. Between Mars and Jupiter, there's a gap right now.
The basic story of Mars is told in this picture from the HiRISE camera, which is operated out of a lunar and planetary lab, or just down the mall, by the University of Arizona. It's a dry desert for the most part. Water cannot exist on the surface of Mars. If you put a cup of water there right now, it would evaporate and boil away in a fraction of a second. So there is no water on Mars, but Mars has done more than tantalize us. It's told us that it is an interesting place to look harder. And of course, we've done more than do it with orbiters. We've done it with rovers, although for the life of me, I don't know why they didn't just turn left a little bit here, why they got stuck behind that boulder. I don't know. It's NASA. Don't ask. Okay. But not to mock NASA at all, we're recently celebrating both a bittersweet celebration, 6 and 7 years for the Mars rovers, Spirit and Opportunity. Spirit almost certainly is trapped forever. I was at JPL a week ago, and they have this sad mock-up of Spirit, full-size, with its wheels completely covered in sand that it's never going to get out of. So Spirit, I think, is truly dead. Opportunity rolls on, so we can just take a moment to celebrate Spirit and an incredible amount that it's told us about Mars. Spirit and Opportunity between them have provided abundant geochemical evidence that water existed on the surface of Mars. We've had some of this evidence for decades. The first orbiters produced pictures that even to the untutored eye are just reminiscent of running water, river deltas, shallow basins where water once sat. But the models of Mars suggest that Mars could not have held liquid water for a long time, perhaps 2 to 3 billion years ago. And that's a little disappointing. So finding life there would be perhaps fossilized microbial life. Very difficult to do with the rovers that we have currently there, or even the ones planned. As I said, Mars tantalizes. This pair of pictures taken less than 4 years apart show that it's not just ancient water on Mars. Mars has water now. Episodically and in very small locations, water erupts onto the surface as we speak. Somewhere on Mars, water is probably erupting right now. You're seeing the edge of an escarpment in these pair of pictures, and before the second picture, in the best models of this, about 300 swimming pools worth of water erupted from a subsurface aquifer through to the edge of an escarpment and then coursed down the sandy hillside, carving out this channel, and then evaporated into space. So the best modeling suggests that there is liquid water right now under Mars, 10, 50, 100 meters down. We don't know how far down. And of course, where there is water, kept liquid, in this case by pressure and from above and radioactive heating from below, there is, of course, the possibility of life. So while Mars is mostly dead